Parents of Reddit, what is the most unsettling thing you have heard or seen your child do? My son walked into the room butt naked, holding a pair of scissors, and asked why his younger sister didn't have a pee. He never explicitly said he was thinking of performing surgery on himself, but we kept a close eye on him for a few weeks and hid all the scissors. When my daughter was about 3 or 4, she started talking about the Blue Lady. My wife and I asked her who she was, and we were told, "I don't know, but she wants her hands back." Chills. This went on for a few weeks. The story never changed, and it was always the Blue Lady needs her hands. We were seconds away from getting a priest or a witch in to bless the house. One morning, I'm watching TV, and there is a woman in a blue U.S. Post Office uniform saying, "Thanks to blah blah hand cream, I got my hands back." And my daughter comes running into the room screaming, "That's the Blue Lady! I love her!" I relaxed so hard I nearly ished myself. Edit. This comment really blew up. Thanks for the love. There are actually 2 other unexplainable stories about the time we lived in that house, both of which we can't connect to TV commercials. So as a quick bonus, she had 2 imaginary friends while we lived there. One was Samantha, a little girl who she played with. Samantha would leave at night, and my daughter would say goodbye near our back door. When we asked where she lives, her answer was, "In the backyard, under the grass," but going there makes her sad. The other friend was a man named Monsterist, or something close to it. According to my daughter, he had long black hair and wore brown pants and no shirt. He used to wear red or blue paint, and he carried a long stick. We live in an area that had a large Native American population in the past, and that's what he sounded like to us. He would also stand on the porch every night until morning. When we finally told my oldest, then 3, I was pregnant, he stopped and grabbed my stomach intently. He thought for a moment, and then he said, "And we don't stab the baby with knives." Correct, child. A few greatest hits. When my son was about 2 or 3, for a few days in a row he told me that there was someone in his room with no eyes, just ears, the night before. For a while around age 3, that same son got confused about the meaning of dead, and would use it to mean inanimate. So a stuffed animal cat would be a dead cat, and a doll would be a dead kid, etc. Now, at 4 years old, when he's having a tantrum about something mundane, like he doesn't want to go to bed or doesn't want to get dressed, he'll threaten to make himself not alive anymore. Meanwhile, when my daughter was around 5 years old, she discovered the concept of wills and inheritance, probably from the Aristocats movie, if I recall, and went through a phase of asking if various items of mine, usually sparkly stuff, like jewelry, would be hers one day after I had died. Fun times. When my daughter was learning her ABCs, one morning at breakfast she sang all the way through for the first time. We congratulated her and asked if she'd been practicing at daycare. "No, Mommy's mommy taught me when I was in bed." Mommy's mommy died 3 years earlier. For a few weeks, my daughter started panicking at bedtime about the parents that would visit her during the night. It escalated to some serious nightmares and terrors, and was also creepy as ish. We asked her a lot of questions regarding, are the parents us? Are they your friend's parents? Never knew if shady ish is going on there. Always no, just the parents. A few weeks into it, my wife is driving down the road with her, and she freaks out. "Ma, look, it's the parents." It was effing scarecrows. Somehow she thought scarecrows were called parents. And of course scarecrows are creepy. It was also Halloween, so yeah, she was terrified of them. My son went through a phase when he was 6 where he would write, "Help me, let me out," on everything. It was on all his drawings, and he'd write it outside on the side of the house for the neighbors to see. Then he started writing, "Help me," backwards, like some Red Rum-ish. Turns out he was really into Goosebumps, and one of the episodes had a girl trapped in a mirror writing "Help me." To the people looking in the mirror, "Help me" was backwards. Mystery solved. My kid is just a bit theatrical. I caught my nephew bringing food to a dead wolf he named Cody. We all thought Cody was a friend from school because he had a classmate named Cody that he would go hang out with. Nope. I followed him to Cody's house, which was a cave about 50 feet out of town in the woods, and there was all sorts of wrappers and snacks and a decaying wolf's body. My youngest daughter was about 4. We are sitting on the couch watching PBS Kids. She reaches over and pauses the TV. Then she looks at me affectionately and says, "Mommy, when you turn into a zombie, I will have to lock you in a room and keep you there. I promise to feed you brains every day, but you can't have my brains." I asked her how she plans to get the brains to feed zombie mommy, and she says, Well, I will have to kill a lot of people, but I'm sure I will get used to it. There was much conversation after that. What stayed with me was not if I became a zombie, but when. She was very sure I would. When I asked about where her dad and her sister were, she said they would be dead, likely the first people she fed to me. But I wouldn't know it because all I cared about were brains. I wondered for a long while how my 4-year-old landed on the thought of zombies and murder. My oldest finally filled in that the last time my dad had babysat, he fell asleep on them, so youngest started scrolling through the channels until she found some zombie movie. I was pregnant, waiting on my second child, and my firstborn was about 2 years old. She had some speech delays and usually formed sentences containing max 2 or 3 words. Anyhow, I was making dinner and my daughter was in the kitchen with me. Suddenly she looks at me, points up with her finger, and states calmly and matter-of-factly, "I used to watch you from up there." I had no words for her. I simply turned around and stared at her. She smiled and ran off to play. Now I wish I would have asked her more about what she meant by that. When my kid was around 2-ish, she told me one morning, "Mommy, the ghost picked me up last night." I was like, what the F? Because I've never talked to her about ghosts or used the word ghost or anything along those lines. Something she could have easily picked up at a daycare or from a kid's show or something. A few years later, when she was around 5-ish, she was like, "Mommy, remember how I used to cry at night?" She was a terrible sleeper and would wake up 4 times a night and cry until we came to get her. She said, "It's because the ghost used to come in my room and pick me up at night." My son was almost 3 years old when he called me to his room about 5 minutes after he was put to bed. I asked him what was wrong, and he replied, "I'm scared." I asked him, "What are you afraid of?" "I'm scared of the old lady with the angry red eyes." I figured he saw something on the telly or his iPad, so I, while bent over his baby bed in the corner, asked him where he'd seen this old lady with the angry red eyes. "She's standing right behind you." Dang, that was chilling. Worst of all, I turned around, slowly, looked around, and said, "There's nobody here. Everything's okay." Kissed him goodnight and left him, but left the door halfway open. Still feel bad about it, but wasn't going to let some angry old red-eyed ghost be F with my family. When I was 7 months pregnant with my 3rd kid, we put our 2 kids in the van along with everything we could fit and drove from the East Coast to the West Coast to start a new job. The kids were 1 and 3. We stopped fairly often for pee breaks for me and to let the kids run around. On the 3rd day, they were especially worked up, so we stopped at a park somewhere in New Mexico or Arizona, or that area. We sat down and let them play on the playground as we had a little picnic. The 3-year-old was having a blast, but I noticed he kept talking to himself, laughing at his own jokes, and being generally weird. When he came over to eat, I asked him what was up, and he said he was playing with Tony. I asked who Tony was, and he said it was his new friend. Then he started laughing because Tony was next to him telling him something silly. It wasn't the first imaginary friend he had, but for some reason this one was creeping me out a little. But I just told him to eat up and he could play a bit more before we left. When it was time to go, he was more upset than usual, telling me that Tony didn't want him to go. Tony wanted him to stay with him. Tony said he could stay forever. I was honest to God just shivering at this point, because I was dealing with pregnancy hormones, and for whatever reason this was just freaking me out. So I picked him up and carried him screaming to the car. My husband had taken our 18-month-old and we got them both in their seats. I realized I had left my purse behind, so I went to go get it. Hand on my heart, the next part is true, though I understand if you think I am lying or karma farming. I should probably Google to find out where this park was, but it was 8 or 9 years ago, and I don't remember. As I turned around to head back to the car, I saw a plaque next to the entrance to the park, right under the sign. It was a memorial dedication to a 7-year-old boy who had been killed when he had been hit by a car while biking home from the park in the 1980s. His name was Anthony. We got in the car and left as fast as possible, and we only stopped at McDonald's play places for the rest of our trip. Watching my nephew, we were playing tag and I was chasing him around the house when he, disappeared. He showed up behind me and I said, "Oh, there you are, Dylan. How'd you get there?" He looked me dead in the face, serious as ever, and said, "I'm not Dylan," in a deep, raspy voice. I laughed it off and told him to go watch TV. My youngest slipped and fell in the shower when she was 8. She broke her 2 front teeth. Fast forward to last year, she told my wife and I that she did it on purpose. She was intending to break her arm so she could get sympathy from her friends at school. I went in to check on my sleeping daughter, who was 4 at the time, and she rolled onto her back and muttered in her sleep, "I must not eat humans. Humans are not food," and then rolled back onto her side. When she was 3, we'd gone for a meal at a really old pub/restaurant. She wanted the toilet, so I took her, and the pub had this kind where it's a little room on its own. Now she was in that phase where they are all basically small terrorists, and if you do or say the wrong thing, well, there will be the most almighty tantrum. Her big thing was no talking while she was on the toilet. 3-year-olds are weird. So I'm standing there silently looking out of this really tiny barred window while she does her business. It's a tiny Tudor window, and the first thought that popped into my head was that it would be impossible to get out of if the place was on fire. Don't know why, but that's just my brain. Suddenly I hear her little voice say, "It's okay, Mummy. There won't be a fire." Now I know 100% I did not say anything out loud. She had me well trained, but somehow she heard my thoughts. She did it again a couple of times in the next few months, and then has never done it again. It was so bloody weird. Oh, I've got a good one. So my son was probably about 4 or 5. I wake him up every morning. I go in one morning and he's already awake in bed, his eyes wide open and blanket pulled up to his chin. He is completely still and just staring at the corner of his room. I look at him, look at the corner, wait a couple of seconds, and asked him what was wrong. Still looking at the corner, he says, "Somebody crawled on the floor and up the wall and looked around. When he looked at me, his head did this." Then he pointed his finger in the air and just started spinning it in a circle very fast. I put my hand on his back and said, "Let's go get breakfast and watch some cartoons." He looked very freaked out and I wanted to get his mind off of it. As he is walking down the hall in front of me, he sort of half whispers out loud, "He just faded away." I didn't let him know it, but I was freaking out on the inside. He is 8 years old now, and I asked him if he remembers it. He said he does, and that he saw it another time backwards crawling on the ceiling before just fading away again. Freaky. When my daughter was young, we'd be riding in the car and she'd randomly say, "My sisters are here," then animatedly whisper to the empty back seat behind her. She was very lighthearted about the whole thing. She spoke of Ira and other sisters that she didn't know their names. She was always happy to see them. Being an only child, imaginary friends weren't a concern to me. What was worrisome was that it only happened near cemeteries. It was one of those creepy things you'd try to explain away. She'd say it, and I'd look around, relieved to see no headstones in sight, only to find a small family plot buried in the brush alongside the road a few moments later. Once it happened on vacation. She said it at the base of a hill. As we crested the hill, there was a cemetery on the other side. I have no clue why, and she never mentioned the cemeteries or ever acknowledged them. It happened frequently, and I would just shrug it off. Eventually she got older and it stopped. She's a teen now, says when she thinks of it, it's like a dark room full of different girls, with the light only shining on the girl she knew as Ira in the forefront. I googled the name Ira. It means watchful in Hebrew. My grandmother and grandfather raised me. To me, they were my parents. My grandmother passed away in 2015, and my grandfather passed away when my son was 5 months old. My son was born in 2020. When my son was younger than 2-ish, he would stare into the air and giggle, eyes following something. And I'm talking hysterically giggle and belly laugh. It would keep him up at night when he was trying to go to sleep. Eventually, I just assumed it was my grandparents playing with him and that he could see them, which my husband was adamantly against as he doesn't believe in ghosts. One night when I was alone, I was rocking him and he was laughing and looking at the same area of the ceiling, following something. Out loud, I said, "Let him sleep, Nanny. You can play together tomorrow when he wakes up." Immediately, he stopped laughing, closed his eyes, and fell asleep. I told my husband and he thought I was nuts. Lol. He believed it happened but was convinced it was a coincidence. Rightfully so. I thought it may be too. The next night, my husband and I are playing with my son before bed, and my husband offered to rock him to sleep. The same thing was happening, so I quietly walked in and sat beside the rocking chair and watched my son in glee, smiling ear to ear and staring at the ceiling, following something. I rubbed his head and whispered, "Okay, Nanny, let's let him sleep for the night. He's had a big day." Again, he immediately closed his eyes and fell asleep. My husband was completely freaked out. Since then, whenever he did this, we politely asked my grandmother to let him sleep so they could play together in the morning. I'm telling you, it worked every time we asked. If it didn't work when I asked for my grandma to stop, I told my papa to let the boy sleep, and it would work. I barely believed in ghosts or spirits or anything before, but I do now. My husband, too.